Welcome to True and Unpolished, the podcast, a Cuss Culture production. Through this podcast, our intention is to uplift, inspire, and amuse.
Let's get authentic. Hi, I'm Lydia Singleton.
And I'm Nicole Wilson.
And you are listening to True and Unpolished, the podcast. Today, we have special guest, Mary Howell. She is an artist, art therapist, modern day mindfulness expert, and life coach. And she has an amazing thing to teach us. I have tried to do a version of this before many times because it's such an amazing concept and so helpful. And now we actually have her to explain it to you. So I think it's going to go much better. The concept that we're talking about is called the prover. And I'm going to give my very watered down layman terms definition, and then I'm going to let Mary respond to that. So the way that I think of the prover is this. We all have judgments. We all make judgments all the time. That's what our ego does. So we make a judgment. And let's say, for example, I have a judgment that says all people with curly hair are mean. And so there's my judgment. Mary's got curly hair. That is not right with you at all. All people that have curly hair are mean is my judgment. That judgment is a thought then that becomes an instruction to my prover. All of us have our prover. So my prover then goes out on the job and it gives me all of the evidence that people with curly hair are in fact mean. And not only does it point out examples of that to me, my prover will actually change my behavior and my words and the way that I talk so that I actually elicit curly haired people's wrath. Is that true, Mary? Did I just explain the prover in the most eloquent way ever?
Yeah, that's how I understand it. I actually got the concept from a book called Money is My Friend. And basically it is based on the idea that our thoughts become beliefs. Mm-hmm. So every thought is a belief is a thought that we just keep thinking.
Right.
And once we start thinking something, it really just becomes a part of our unconscious belief system. Right. So we don't even have to really try to think something. And if we've been told a story from a young age, or then when we get older, we tell ourselves a story, what happens is we develop these belief systems around it. So the thinker is really just an automatic process that happens because of these belief systems that we develop throughout our life. And what the prover sets out to do is, well, we all want to be right. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, that is our ego. Our ego mm-hmm. has a need to stand out, and we either want to be right or mostly we want to be right, or we just want to stand out. And so the prover sets out to prove that our thought or our belief system is true.
You know what? I'm sorry to interrupt, but I want to interject something here because my first therapist, who I absolutely adore, he said it to me in this way. He said, we inherit these belief systems early on. We start, we come up with a belief system, or we inherit it from our parents' belief system, so for example, I am not okay, something like that. And our prover goes and proves it right, because that's the only way that we feel safe, even if it's a truth that is, negative. For our prover goes to work for us to prove it, because that's the only way that the world makes sense to us. That's how we can feel safe in the world, because our belief system, our belief has been affirmed, even if it's a negative belief.
Right. Well, I think that speaks to the ego too, mm-hmm. because what we spend the first part of our life doing is building a container. That's what Richard Rohr talks mm-hmm. about, is building a container. And so that is directly related to the ego. So it becomes our persona. It becomes who we are, who we tell the world that we are. And so, yeah, I think it is a way for us to stand out in that being noticed, being recognized because of what our ego does. Our ego strength actually does that for us, is create that container so that we can stand out. And so that there is safety in that. So the ego is not always bad.
Right.
But if like, one of my belief systems is they don't respect me. And I got a dog. She's like several years old, but you know, Lydia, that this dog has been a holy terror in my life. And so I would think, this jerk doesn't respect me. And I didn't even know I was really thinking it, but she was a holy terror and she drove me nuts. And so I would just constantly notice everything that she was doing wrong. Like, look, she's biting at my feet. Look, she just peed on the rug. Look, you know, I was just able to point out over and over again what she was doing. Right. But then I recognized that I was having these thoughts. So initially they were just automatic thoughts and I wasn't even aware of them. And then I began to become conscious of that negative thought pattern that I was having. And so I began, and this is where I kind of came up with the prover, shifting the prover. And so what I did was I recognized that my prover was looking for evidence that this dog didn't respect me. And this relates to a belief that I have in my life in general with my relationships with people. And so by recognizing that and then looking for evidence that the opposite was true, I was able to change the relationship with my terrible dog.
Right. And so you put your prover to work for you, you know, instead of, you know, your prover working for these automatic thoughts that you aren't, you know, you put it to work for you. And I can tell you that I have a Mary's dog story where I was literally waiting for a ride to the airport because I had to catch a plane back home with my two boys, and the dog got out. And it started to rain, and I did not know where I was because I'm like running, following this dog. Anyway, it's a long story, but I just want to tell you that the dog doesn't respect me either. So apparently I also have that going on. And, you know, this is where I had somebody request that I talk about, and it fits so well. So we all have, I want everybody picture a circle. And if you've heard me talk at all, I'm sure you've heard me mention this because I think that it's really important and it ties into this prover conversation. If you think about it in this way, we all have a belief system. It's a circle, right? A belief system, BS. That's the part where I always laugh. And inside that belief system, these are all the things that you know to be true. These are your beliefs. And then right outside of that circle is another circle. And in that circle, that is your adjacent possible. And Paul Hasselbeck actually created this, by the way. I don't want to take credit for it. The circle right outside that belief system is adjacent possible. And what that means is the things in that circle, they aren't a part of your belief system, but they are close enough to your belief system that you can grow into those beliefs. You can stretch into those beliefs. And then outside of that circle is another circle. And that is your not adjacent, not possible, which means it's way too far away from what's in your belief system for you to get to that belief, right? And so I'll give an example. And the one I like to give is inside my belief system as a child was that, you know, I was separate from God. Like that was the belief system. I was separate from God and I was a sinner and I was born a sinner. So in my not adjacent, not possible, meaning way too far away, is I am one with God and I am inherently good. That was in my not adjacent, not possible. Well, now those things have switched. And now what's in my belief system is I am one with God. I was born good and I am inherently good. And in my not adjacent, not possible is God is separate from me and that I was born sinful. And the way that I got from here to there is slowly growing into a different belief. So I slowly got into that adjacent possible, which said, well, maybe I could be a child of God just like Jesus. And, so I incrementally got there. So I always encourage people to recognize what's in that belief system and ultimately try to be willing to be flexible. Does that bring to mind anything for you, Mary, in terms of the prover?
Well, I think, I definitely think it is, I think that's a more conscious place that we get to.
Right.
So with what I'm talking about is the first step is recognizing the unhelpful thought or belief.
And how do I do that?
Well, one way that you do it is you notice the pain that you're experiencing. So that would be anger, frustration, any form of anger, frustration, irritability, or it could be a form of fear, anxiety, those kind of emotions. So typically a painful emotion is going to let me know that I'm having this kind of thought or unhelpful thought. It's not to say that every time I think that something was disrespectful, that every time I think that it's not helpful, because maybe it helps motivate me to stand up for myself or take action. So I'm setting a boundary.
Right.
So it's not to say every thought like that is unhelpful, but when it triggers unnecessary pain, then it's not a helpful thought. Right. And so what I want to do is begin to use and I know y'all talked about this on the podcast a couple of weeks. So using my emotions as guidance to help me get where I want to go. So if I notice that painful emotion, then I can stop, breathe, and practice some form of mindfulness, and then become aware of, oh, what was I just thinking? It's a step-by-step process, but it starts with noticing your emotion. So with this, if you notice your emotion, then back up and notice your thought. Then the next step is to recognize when you're looking for evidence that backs that up. And so when my dog would do all those things, then it was easy for me to kind of roll with that. But what I did next was I stopped myself and said, okay, well, where is the opposite true?
Yeah.
And so the little things, like she's hilarious. She'll sit, if somebody comes in the door, she'll sit and she'll just like wag her tail and wait for them to pet her. And like she'll wait forever, but as soon as they pet her and move their hand, then she's jumping up again. So I would just move to the behavior instead of stopping and recognizing in that moment she sat and she waited.
Yeah, right. And
it's noticing those little tiny moments, even, because when you begin to recognize those moments that prove a new thought or a new belief, then that's when you begin to shift. And I think that's what relates to your adjacent possible.
Right.
But I think in order to get to your place, you've got to start by recognizing your emotions, then the thought, and then looking for the evidence. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And I like to say proof doesn't equal truth, because that's what happens is we think that because we have proof of something that is telling us that it's true. And this concept tells us that is absolutely not the case, that you can get all the proof you want, and that doesn't mean necessarily that it is the final truth. And I'll say that for me, joke about this, but I mean, I think it's true. I would say that I am challenged in the area of emotion. I'm very cerebral. And so, you know, the way I look for the prover is I look and see what's happening in life. So if, you know, a car keeps cutting me off in traffic, if every time I go out, I get cut off by a car in traffic, I don't pinpoint the emotion. I go, wait a minute, something's showing up over and over and over again. This must mean that I've got a prover going on. I've got, you know, a belief system going on, because, you know, thoughts become things. You know, we create our own reality through thought. So I don't necessarily do it by the negative emotion and backing it up that way. But I hear what you're saying. And that's one of the reasons too why Mary, you know, is so helpful for me as a friend, because she invites me into the realm of emotion. And I think that she would tell you that for me, from her perspective, I invite her into the realm of, you know, logic rather than emotion.
Right.
So we do that for each other all the time. I know that when I'm inspired to call Mary, that it really is because I need to embrace some kind of emotion, and she's going to help me find it. Because sometimes I really don't know that I have them.
Well, that's where I live. So,
yeah. Nicole, has this brought up anything for you with the prover?
Well, I'm just thinking about the prover, and not necessarily in a belief system, but the fact that it brings you to awareness of different things. Like 3 years ago when I was pregnant, I had pregnancy brain, and all I saw was pregnant women everywhere. Right. You know, when I bought my new car, I never really saw a Chevy Equinox until I bought a new car, and then all of a sudden, you know, that's what I keep seeing. So thinking about that and how that happens is what really helped me understand the concept of the prover, to go deeper with it. You know, like it just is whatever is in your awareness. Right. But then when you attach it to like those thoughts and those beliefs, it just is that much more powerful.
Well, that's just pointing to perception creates reality, right? So, you know, if you're driving a Chevy Equinox and you buy one, and I buy a Volkswagen, and I see Volkswagens everywhere and you see Chevy Equinoxes everywhere, it's not because you live in a separate universe than I. We're in the same universe, but we're having a different perception of that same universe. Yeah, I can see that too.
Yeah, just thinking about it in that way, just in common layman's terms, I guess, is what really helped me to understand the whole prover thinker thing.
And it's really, really important to understand that you can put your prover to work for you. You can say to your prover, you know, like in the case of Mary and her dog, saying, okay, I'm going to look for evidence that my dog is not crazy and that my dog doesn't disrespect me, and look for that evidence. And what's the payoff? The payoff then, right, is a happier existence, right?
Right. And creating more of what you want.
Yeah.
So, you know, that's what I teach, is how to create more of what you want. And so looking for the evidence that the opposite is true helps you create more of that. So like what Nicole was saying, you know, you're automatically going to attract more of what you're paying attention to. So why not shift it and pay attention to something new and better that you want to actually create for yourself.
Right. And that brings up a good point. Mary is in the process of finalizing a course that she designed. And Mary, interject if I'm saying this right or wrong, but it's Create More, and it's art practices and life skills. It combines those two things to help you create more of the life you want. So this is one of those practices I'm assuming is going to be a part of that course. Is that right, Mary?
Yeah, well, I'm talking about the shifting of perspective and aligning intentions. So that definitely goes along with this thinker prover concept.
Yeah. So how can we just real quickly maybe talk about it in terms of people? Let's say, so that same concept, people don't respect me. right? And so everywhere you look, you have all this evidence. Your prover is pointing it out to you, and not just pointing it out to you. And tell me if this is true, because I feel like this is true. I think actually somebody suggested this to me, and I went, oh yeah, that's right. Not only is my prover pointing it out to me, but my prover is actually shaping my behavior and my thoughts and my words to elicit from people them not respecting me. Is that right? So if I have a relationship that the truth in my belief system is that this person, my spouse, he does not respect me, does it work the same? Can I use it in that kind of instance too?
Yeah. Are you, I'm confused about your question, but you're instead of a dog?
Well, yes, not just dog. I mean, these things. So when what we were talking about was the dog, which seems to be lighter. So
yes, of course.
I have my son is 3, and I have been working at home with him, constant 24/7, attached to my hip. He wants to come watch me pee. Like, I don't get a shower by myself. I'm constantly, and we call him Monster Man. He's a very active 3-year-old. And recently I was around with some friends, and they were talking about how, oh, he's so cute. Like, yeah, he is.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
So I have been trying to realize how cute he really is. Like, he is very sweet. He is very cute. He just has these moments that are driving me crazy, probably it also because of this global situation we're in too, and just being home. But I have been taking pauses and just just witnessing his sweetness, because that is there. And I've noticed the more I stop and take a breath and to notice, how beautiful and sweet he is, the less he drives me nuts.
Yeah. And what's important about this conversation is when we want, I think that that the instinctual response when you want to change something in your life, the instinctual response is, I'm going to try to change people, things, circumstances around me in such a way that when I look at them, or when I'm around them, or when I experience them, I am happier. And that doesn't work. Even if it works for a minute, it doesn't work in a lasting way. What we're talking about is changing and creating more of the life you want by taking ownership of it. And it doesn't have to do with switching out the players in your life or their activities, though it could be that ends up happening. But this is really about not being a victim, because all of those thoughts, the thought they don't respect me, those are all victim consciousness kind of thoughts. And when we are in victim consciousness, our prover is going to prove to us how we are a victim. So it doesn't even have to be just they don't respect me, because the energetic quality behind no one respects me is I'm a victim of the world I see, and I'm a victim of you. And so I will be a victim. My prover will show me how I'm a victim in all these other arenas too, because that's the level of consciousness where we are. And so when Mary talks about putting the prover to work for you and having the prover look for the opposite, what you're doing is reaching up to that victor level of consciousness. So instead of I'm a victim of the world I see, you are then reaching up and saying, oh, I have influence over what I think, and therefore can change, the world I see. And then the next level that I talk about is vessel, which is I am a part of something larger than just my identity, and I can open myself up to that something larger, that greater power, and allow it to work through me. And then the final one, the word that I use and that I was taught is verity, but really it's oneness, where you recognize that you are one with all that is, one with God, one with each other. And I added in here because it fits. And I actually had somebody request that I go over that. And I thought this is the perfect place to talk about that with the prover, because it that prover concept is really helping us reach up from that victim level of consciousness.
So I wanted to add with this because I think what I'm getting from this discussion is that it's hard to kind of see how to get into this, and I think the way to do it is to start small.
Yes.
So in whatever that you recognize, in whatever way that you're able to access this in your own consciousness is the way to go. So I know an example would be, something as simple as somebody holding the door for you when you go into a store. So there's an example of somebody respecting other people. And you could stand and try to go into a door 10 times in a row, and maybe only a small percentage would actually open the door for you. But surely if you went into a door 10 times, then somebody would be there to open that door. And so it's the idea here is, do I want to feel better?
Yes.
And sometimes victim consciousness is feeling better, because then we're validated, because it's like, oh, look at me, my life is so hard, everything's so difficult. And so sometimes that's where we want to be. I've certainly wanted to be there plenty of times, but eventually that gets old, and it becomes more painful than the validation is worth.
That's a really, really good point. I like to say to set a timer. Like, I like to, and it doesn't have to be minutes, it could be a day, but I like to set a timer where, I can feel like a victim, where I feel, outraged at something that I feel was done to me. And so I set the timer, and I do that because I allow myself to be in that space. And then when the timer's over, I reach up, not because ultimately I want to be truly helpful to myself, and truly helpful to myself means that I don't live in victim.
So I think the idea here is recognize, is this pain worth it?
Yeah.
And if it's not, then that's when you begin looking for the evidence that the opposite is true.
Yeah.
So they don't respect me. Look, they didn't even open the door for me. Well, then, to begin to look for those little things that people do, and that can be strangers, or it can be your best friend or your most intimate partner. It doesn't have to be any particular kind of relationship. It can be an surface level or very casual kind of relationship that helps you enter into this new way of thinking or believing.
And that new way of thinking then give you a new kind of life. Mary, this is an amazing tool, and you can find more amazing tools from Mary, as well as her art, and get information about the course that she is going to be releasing at Cusp Culture/Mary Howe. That's Cusp Culture/Mary Howe. Mary, thank you for being here. We love you very, very much, and this has been really helpful.
Thank you for having me.
This is Lydia Singleton.
And Nicole Wilson.
And you've been listening to True and Unpolished, the podcast. Let's see what happens next.